Hi. Hello. So it's a sad day in the neighborhood. Unfortunately, as the title suggests, I am stopping in my reading journey with Berserk. I'll get to why I'm making this video in a little bit, but I'm a little nervous about making it just because Berserk has been a really unique situation for me where I don't think the story necessarily did much wrong. It just doesn't sit correctly with me, and it doesn't cater to my preferences enough to where I want to keep going with it. So I'll get into all that, obviously, but that's what this video is going to be about. It was not clickbait. I did stop reading Berserk. So yeah. So I got to the middle of the 13th volume before I decided that I was going to quit. That's basically the concluding little bit of the Golden Age arc. I think it extends through volume 14. And so I quit in the middle of 13. Why am I even making this video if I decided I was going to quit reading Berserk? Like, why didn't I just quit quietly, First of all, I just really like to verbalize my thoughts. It really helps me. It helps me kind of reflect on things. I also just think it's a good idea to show all sides of interpretation of art, the good and the bad. And my bad might be someone else's good. So you never know, I might be helping someone. And also, I wanted to share my experience of reading Berserk on this channel. That's why I made a video on the first arc of Berserk. I wanted to just share what it was like for me reading this as another person consuming this piece of media. And so I wanted to be honest about it. And that's what I'm going to do here. And honestly, if you don't want to hear any complaints at all about Berserk, that's totally fine. I'll see you in the next one or never, I guess. But just know that I am going to be speaking a little bit negatively about the series. I have a ton of positive things to say too. Just, the overall tone is I'm telling you why I'm not going to be continuing on with the series. So let's catch up to now a little bit. In my last video that I made on the Black Swordsman arc, the first arc, if you haven't seen it, totally fine. I mean, you can watch it if you want, but I'll give you the gist, which is that I was overall very skeptical of the story. However, I could see the potential and I could see it going in a good direction for me personally and how I would perceive it. So I started to read the Golden Age. I continued on with, kind of high hopes. Again, I was a little guarded, but mostly high hopes. And so yeah, at the beginning of the Golden Age, I was still not feeling great about it. But as I kept reading, I felt better and better, and I started liking it more and more. And then my enjoyment started to kind of go down. And then I finally got to the point where I just didn't even want to read it anymore. I think at first glance when I say that, it could be that the reason that I stopped was because I was upset by some things that happened in the narrative, because it does get very disturbing at the end of this arc. And I will just say flat out, the things that happened narratively are not what made me want to stop. Like, I wasn't just so upset with the plot and so, angry that I rage quit. I'm quitting because of very specific choices that the mangaka has made and seems to have been continuing to make for a while that just really got under my skin. I'll get into all that, of course, but that's just kind of my overall reason. So some disclaimers first. I just want to say, I really want to be specific about this. I'm not dropping Berserk for any sort of quality reasons. This is a very unique situation to me where I don't dislike it. I don't think it's a bad series at all. There's no technical reason why I'm stopping this. It's all about my preferences and what I tend to prefer. That's what's to account for my choice. Also, I just want to say I'm not encouraging anyone not to read Berserk, or I'm not saying you're wrong for liking it or anything. This is totally one person's subjective opinion. As I said before, you're more than free to click off of this video if you don't want to hear anyone speak negatively about something you like. Totally okay. Also, this is going to be completely spoiler filled. I could do a spoiler free section, but I just feel like to truly speak my piece and explain myself fully, I need to not have to hold myself back from spoilers. So I'm not going to go through a play-by-play of everything that happened. Well, I kind of do in a little bit. I'll tell you why in a second, but just know that there is going to be possible spoilers. So if you want to go into Berserk fresh, I would not recommend watching this, or just be forewarned. So I'm going to start off with some of my feelings about the arc leading up to the point where I stopped, and then move on to why I'm dropping it. And actually a while ago, like maybe a month ago, I decided to film a little bit because I was already filming another video, and I was like, well, as long as I've got everything set up, I might just take a second and talk about what I've been thinking and feeling about Berserk so far. I think it's going to be interesting to see how my mood has shifted. So I am going to go ahead and insert those clips just to, give full transparency of everything I was feeling about this arc. So I'm going to insert that now. You'll see what I was feeling at first, and then I'll come back and discuss a little bit more. As I've probably already said in my intro to this video, I am part of the way through the Golden Age arc right now, and I decided that I wanted to just get some of my thoughts out while I already have all my camera and everything set up. I thought it would be interesting just to take stock of how I'm feeling at this point in the arc before we get to the end of it. Before I get into my thoughts, I do want to give a disclaimer just to be completely upfront and honest. Before I started Berserk, I did look into the contents and look into things of it because I had heard from a lot of people that it was so dark and it was really hard for a lot of people to get through and they had to stop reading and all this stuff. I was like, okay, I need to make sure for myself that what's in the story are going to be things that I can handle mentally and emotionally. So I did some research before I started. I looked up stuff online. I looked up what was really upsetting for people. I looked up what triggered people kind of, I looked up all that stuff. So I did come across some spoilers. So I will say that I do know some kind of pivotal stuff that happens, especially in the Golden Age arc, especially during the eclipse and, around the time of the eclipse. I just want to share that so the lens through which I am seeing the story. So these are the things that I know. I know that Griffith betrays the protagonists in some way. I don't know exactly what that means. I just know he betrays them. I know that everyone from the Band of the Hawk dies by the end of the eclipse. And I don't know if it's everyone from the Band of the Hawk or just the characters that we know, the named characters that we know. I also know what happens to Casca at the end of the eclipse. That's the one I really have the most trouble with. So I don't know super specific details beyond that, but I do know these kind of broad ideas of things that happen. So it has been interesting reading through this arc, knowing that Griffith is going to have some big betrayal, even as Miura is building up this relationship between Guts and Griffith and everyone else in the Band of the Hawk too. So anyways, I just wanted to give that disclaimer before we really get into things so you know how I was seeing the story, how I was experiencing it. I don't know that it's necessarily taking away from my experience. In fact, I think it's kind of interesting because I'm seeing things as kind of dramatic irony, knowing how they're going to end up. So it's made the story, take a really interesting turn. I'm not going to be surprised by these things, but it is interesting to know where it goes. I'm seeing the story through a very interesting lens. Anyways, just wanted to give that disclaimer. Okay, so getting into this arc. At this point, I have just finished volume 9 of Berserk. So we've gotten through Guts's horrific childhood. He's joined the Band of the Hawk. He's moved up through the ranks with them. He's the captain of the Raiders, the Hawks Raiders. They've participated in the 100 Years' War, or whatever that war is. They've come close to gaining nobility status. Now Griffith has been captured. It's been a year, and now Guts has finally rejoined with the Hawks. Okay, so that's as far as I've gotten. So I've got a lot that I want to say. I do have a lot I want to say. I've actually been really excited all day to be able to make this video, to sit down and talk, because I've had so much I want to get off my chest. Okay, so first of all, in my last video about the Black Swordsman arc, I was really, really on the fence about this series because I was really over the just kind of edgy edgelord tones it was taking at this point. I do think it's gotten over that a little bit. I actually am truly very organically enjoying Berserk now. I was just really worried that I was gonna just kind of be fighting it the whole way and never really get into it. But I do really think it's a very good story, at least so far. There are things about it that I still dislike and I kind of roll my eyes at, which I'll get into a little bit, but overall, I am really enjoying it. So, okay, when I started the Golden Age, right after the end of the previous arc, I still was kind of in that like, okay, this is just being real edgy with me. I'm like, okay, I get it. Guts' life sucks. So many horrible things happen to him as a child. It is very tragic. Like, I don't discount that. It is very, very sad what he had to go through. But at the same time, I think when really dark things happen in stories like that, I almost kind of just numb myself to it a little bit because I don't want to feel what the characters feel. Like, I don't want to go to that dark place kind of. So for me, that's one of the reasons why I don't like reading it, just because it is really hard to read and see sometimes, but also just because I can't ever really let myself connect with the story that much because of how at a distance I keep it kind of. I actually started to enjoy it once Guts grew up, like physically grew up and joined with the Band of the Hawk. So there was actually a moment when I actually got into the story. And I can pinpoint it. And it's going to maybe sound weird. I wonder if anyone else got into it at this moment too. But it was actually during the little Nosferatu Zod mini arc. The reason was because this was the first time that we had really, really seen Guts get beaten down by something, like physically beaten down. Because every other fight, every other battle that he's in, he just cuts through enemies like they're butter. You know, he faces no opposition. He's too good. And I just don't connect with that type of character. I don't like seeing it. It's not interesting to me. So the fact that we finally found something that he couldn't beat and he was really losing against very horribly was so interesting to me. I loved seeing that. So that really got me finally interested in things. And then after that, I think that's when a lot of the characters started to really interest me. I'll get into my next kind of point here, which is the characters, especially up till this point in the Golden Age arc. I find the other characters more interesting than Guts, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. It is kind of interesting, but I am starting to like Guts now. I'll get into that a little bit, but for a long time, I found Griffith and is it Casca or Casca? I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but I found those two to be wildly more interesting than Guts was. I almost feel like Guts was kind of an afterthought for a large part of the beginning of this arc. So I was kind of okay with that because I thought especially Griffith was very fascinating. As I said earlier, I do know that Griffith betrays everyone. So knowing that has made him such a fascinating character to me because you can really see through the veneer of his facade, kind of. You know, it's been very interesting to see how he acts, knowing that, or I don't even know exactly what's an act and what's not with him. I don't understand him at all. And that's so compelling to me. I really, really like Griffith. I could study him, you know. I could study his motivations. I really wonder if we're going to get more insight into his mind, the inner workings of his mind, because I would love that, but he might just be this kind of mysterious figure forever. I don't know. And then Casca, I really like her too. I'm endeared to her so much. And I think that makes me I think knowing what happens to her at the end of the eclipse almost makes me endeared to her even more. And as a woman, I can relate to her. I like her perspective on the whole world and her perspective being the only woman in this mercenary band. I love seeing her journey, which is, again, just makes me so sad for what's going to come because I believe she becomes kind of catatonic after this, doesn't she? After the eclipse or something like that. Anyway, so like I said, I almost find those two more interesting than Guts. So it's been interesting. I wonder how other people have felt about Guts by this point. Did everyone love him or not? I will say by the end of volume 9, I have started now to really like Guts. Like I said before, I don't really connect with him when he's just chopping heads, chopping bodies, swinging his sword all around. I'm like, yeah, okay, I get it, dude. You're really good with a sword. It's not interesting anymore. What I really like with Guts is when we get to kind of see these little glimpses through into his emotions, into his humanity, if you will. The moments when you can tell after he's been kind of brash and done something just on impulse, the moments after when you can see him kind of reflecting back on his actions and thinking about things and just introspecting on himself and what he does, and sometimes regretting what he did or what he said or whatever. I really like those glimpses into him because that makes him very interesting and very endearing to me. So I am finally starting to like Guts after, I don't know, maybe volume 8-ish. Like I said before, his backstory was just like, oh my God, it's just so dark. I don't want to see all this. But at the same time, I do see how it was kind of necessary to see him go through all that bad stuff just to really see the journey he's been going through and the arc he's been going through. So while I don't necessarily like everything that I'm seeing, I can understand it at the very least. I do just want to say, as far as the plot goes, I think Nosferatu Zod, was that not the first kind of supernatural thing that they've really seen since we saw Guts as a child? Have we ever seen any other kind of demonic creatures? I feel like there wasn't enough weight given to that by the characters. Like, I would be freaking out if I was them. Like, are you kidding me? We're leaving. We're going to another country. I'm not staying here. There's demons here. I don't understand how they're all just like, they all just forgot about it. Maybe I'm wrong and maybe I just totally missed that that's a common occurrence in this world. But up to that point, it didn't really seem so. It was just kind of human conflicts going on. Obviously, it was very terrifying to them at the time and surprising to them. But then afterwards, there wasn't that much reflecting back on it. I don't know. I found that really interesting. I like the foreshadowing that we see for the eclipse. I have found Griffith's, we can already see Griffith on a downward spiral kind of after he, did the deed with Princess Charlotte and as right after Guts left, actually. So I really like Griffith's downfall, his kind of corruption arc almost. I don't even know if you could call it a corruption arc because pretty sure he was already corrupt to begin with. I don't know that I believe Griffith was a good guy like everyone else seemed to in the narrative, but it does kind of seem from the outside like a corruption arc. It's very interesting. I do like Guts and Casca's relationship. I think it's developing very well. It seems very organic. Both their friendship and also romantic relationship, I think they're both evolving in a very organic way. So anyways, like I said, the story definitely has sucked me in at this point. I, at this point, really want to keep reading. I don't know how the story is going to go from here and how I'm going to feel about it in the future, a few volumes later, but I am really enjoying it. So I can see where the love comes from now at this point. And I'm sure it's only going to get better from here. It's either going to get better or worse. I'm not sure, but I can at least start to see now why people love it. Okay. So the last thing I just want to talk about in this little update section is the art style. I think I said in the last video that I just wasn't sure about the art because it was kind of gruesome and all this stuff. The interesting thing is that we haven't seen that many demonic designs so far in the Golden Age, so I haven't been subjected to that, to those horrific things. I'm sure we're going to get more of that, but not yet. So it's been kind of nice. But the thing is, I do think Miura was very good at drawing those. They were I didn't like looking at them, but I do think he did a good job with them. Like, he made them look very terrifying and horrifying. And I do also think he did very good with settings and background details and just the world in general. What I haven't loved from Miura so far are his drawings of humans. I haven't really loved how he's drawn characters. For the first, maybe 5 or 6 volumes, I was just really disliking the way he was drawing humans. I think not only their faces, but the way he would draw their posture was very strange to me, very odd. To be honest with you, it felt like he all the time he drew people, they all looked like they needed to take a crap. Like, everyone looked like they were constipated. I just don't think he got the posture quite right for a long time. And on top of that, I didn't really love the way he drew faces. I think he made them look almost alien. Like, no faces looked right most of the time. I think it was really inconsistent. A lot of the eyes were either too far apart, too close together. The features were all just kind of disproportionate or, in incorrect places. I just wasn't into how he's drawing humans. So that also really didn't help me get into the story because I couldn't connect with any of these human characters because they all didn't look right. Finally, by volume, I would say 7 or so, I think he finally started to get really consistent with how he drew faces and human bodies. And now everyone's starting to look a little more normal. So that has also helped my enjoyment and my engagement with Berserk. So anyways, just about every element of Berserk has gotten exponentially better to me. Like I said, I'm really enjoying it now. I'm very excited to keep going. One of the negatives I do just want to say before I pass it back to future me is I don't love the treatment of female characters in the story so far. I don't really love that Casca is the only prominent female character. I know with Japan and their male-centric audience kind of age genres, almost like seinen and shonen, that's a very common thing to not have a lot of female representation, but I still don't like it. I don't love it. And I also don't love the threat of sexual assault that is very prevalent in Berserk so far. It's never world building that I like. It's not a world that I like to spend time in mentally. I wish there was less of that. It hasn't bothered me too much so far. But if it ramps up, if Miura decides to put even more of that into Berserk, I'm going to get a little pissy about it, I think, because I really don't like it. I take some offense to that. I don't like the way that writers will use sexual violence as a way to show that a world is dark. I especially don't like it when it's prominently shown only towards women in the story. I really dislike that. So we'll see. But for now, it hasn't bothered me too much. So anyways, I think that's all I have to say for this update. That was a lot. I have a lot of thoughts. As I said before, I was very excited to film this so I could get everything out. So anyways, I'll pass it on to future me to talk about the rest of the arc. Hi, current me again. So you can see that overall I was feeling pretty hopeful about the arc and the story, and I was mostly into it at that point. Honestly, I think I was liking Berserk more when it was kind of more on the mundane side. Once the fantasy and horror elements started coming in, I kind of started liking it less and less, which is really interesting because fantasy is the end all be all for me. I love fantasy. It is by and far my favorite genre of stories. But thinking about it, I just don't think I really vibed with how the fantasy was incorporated into the story. As Berserk started to move away from the war drama, the battle manga kind of side of things, my interest started to wane. So once I got past the part that I was speaking about in my past clips, I was still feeling pretty positive about the story at that point. I think shortly after that was when things started to really go wrong for the protagonists. Guts left the Band of the Hawk. Griffith did a bad thing and got imprisoned, and the Band of the Hawk really got screwed over. And like at that point, fine, good. I was all really good with that still. That was great conflict. I loved the drama. I was still very into it. And even when they were rescuing Griffith, I was still very much into it. I think where things really started to go downhill for me was when Wild was introduced, or Wild. I don't know how you pronounce his name. I'm just going to say Wild. So yeah, it was at that point that I really started to get tired of seeing sexual assault in this story. And also at that point, I realized I really didn't like the monster design. So that was like just an element of the story that I really wasn't feeling very much. The monsters are very Lovecraftian. They're very horror leaning, which it just really isn't my style. It's creative design. Like, don't get me wrong. I don't think there's anything wrong with the design of these monsters. It's just, they're more gruesome than I tend to like. And I usually like these like interesting, fantastical creatures, not like eldritch horror monsters. You know what I mean? So yeah, the whole Wild part. And then the eclipse came. And to be honest with you, when the eclipse happened, I didn't feel that much about it. Like, it honestly just didn't really make me feel any sort of way. It didn't move me one way or another. And I know this was supposed to be like a huge climax of the story at that point. Like, obviously there's still a lot of story left to come, but I know like of that story arc, it was supposed to be this huge part. And like, I just didn't feel a lot about it. There were certainly parts of it that I found disturbing, but like, I wasn't crushed by it. I wasn't emotional. I wasn't that horrified or angry or sad or anything. Not at the story itself anyways. There are some things that happened in it that I was like, are you kidding me? But we'll get to that. Also, I noticed at that point that I really just didn't like Miura's battle and action scenes, unfortunately. We'll get into that more in a little bit also. It's another element that I discovered I really just wasn't into so much. So the eclipse was mostly during I think it was like end of volume 12, beginning of volume 13. And it was shortly after the events of the eclipse, like shortly after those chapters, that I decided to stop. I think I gave it like 1 or 2 chapters after the eclipse, and then I just decided I didn't want to pick it up at all again. Like, I just did not ever want to pick up the book and read it again. The things that I really didn't like at that point started to grate on me so much, and I decided that I just couldn't take it anymore. I did not at all want to read one more chapter. It was like pulling teeth at that point, trying to get myself to go physically grab the book and read more. I didn't even want to see the conclusion of this arc at all. I was just done at that point. I was just so done. So, the big question, why did I decide not to continue on? First of all, as I kind of hinted at before, the monster design. Now that the eclipse happened, if we're going to be seeing these monsters more and more, they're going to be getting more page time. I'm really not looking forward to that. I just, like I said, I don't like the design of the monsters. It's too horror leaning, and I just don't like the act of looking at them. I don't like them. I'd rather not see them at all, which is why I stopped. Also, the battle scenes, as I also kind of mentioned before, I do think the art is really great in Berserk. Miura was such a fantastic artist. However, I did find his action so hard to follow. First of all, I do think the battle panels were very busy. There was so much going on that it was really hard for me to parse it sometimes. I also felt like Miura, this is kind of hard to explain, but it's also like he left out too much of the in-between movements and action. From panel to panel, I couldn't always figure out how characters were getting to these different locations or movements or like stances or whatever. It started to confuse me after a while, and like it took too much of my brain power to try to understand some of these action scenes, so I just really started glossing over them, but there are a lot, so it kind of got annoying to me after a little bit. Next is the darkness. Of course, like everyone knows, this is a super dark series. It's very, very entrenched in grimdark, and this series obviously deals with a lot of dark topics, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that for me, I typically go into books or manga wanting to be entertained. Like, I'm not looking for a super emotionally challenging read for the most part, most of the time. So this was really taxing to me to have to deal with this subject matter over and over. It always just required so much of my brain space to be able to fully absorb the emotions of the story. And to see these super dark things happen over and over again, like, it's hard. It's difficult. I'm very much a person that's like, the world is already so dark enough. I don't want to read about it in fiction as well. And I was kind of hoping that, you know, sometimes with grimdark things, it's not that bad, but with Berserk, it did really just start to get to me. So I decided, like, I just didn't want to keep pushing myself to read it if I wasn't having a good time. It just wasn't worth it to me, unfortunately. And now let's move on to my next complaint, which is my biggest complaint of all, truly the nail in the coffin, and that is the treatment of women in this series. First of all, there's barely any women. There's barely any good female characters. And this is the one thing that I actually do have an issue with in execution. Let me just say, I don't care if you want to argue that the treatment of women in the story is historically accurate. I hate the way that women were written here. The amount of sexual assault on women in this series so far, 13-ish volumes in, is more than I'm comfortable with. It is and it isn't treated casually. I would say that it is in just the way that it's so prevalent. Like, why is there so much? But also, like, it's not like Miura is saying that it's good ever, or it's not a big deal. Like, it's always done with the intent to show that it's a bad thing, but it's used so often, too often. And it's also almost only done to women. And it's just, like I said, it's just used so often as just a way to garner sympathy, or show someone had a hard life, or show that the world is dark. At a certain point, it just becomes lazy. And I just think you're a lazy writer for not being more creative and showing ways that the world is dark, or that people had a hard childhood. And, you know, I just get concerned after it's used so often. Writers don't actually understand that they are using it so casually. And listen, it's not just Berserk where this is a problem. This is definitely a problem in a lot of fantasy, and I am so over it. I can't stand it anymore. Whenever I see hints of it in a book or, you know, a manga or whatever, I immediately, my brain subconsciously just puts up walls, and I'm like, you're on thin ice, bud. I instantly flag it subconsciously. And it's really hard at that point then for an author or a writer to bring those walls down in my mind. For me personally, I'm always just a little bit on edge. I want to be clear that I'm not saying anything about Miura's views on the matter, like his personal views. I don't care what he intended for us to feel about the way women are treated. Like, I don't care if it's supposed to be shocking or it's supposed to make us uncomfortable. Why does it have to be sexual assault? There are plenty of other ways to make me shocked or make me feel uncomfortable. It doesn't always have to be this every single time and always done to women. There's plenty of other ways to shock me or make me feel uncomfortable that aren't dehumanizing to women. Either way, I don't want to see it. I'm so tired of it. And to top it off, I've heard about instances of it later in the series, like these things that happen later in the series, and that definitely does not make me want to continue. Also, I just want to point out we get tons of female nudity in the series so far. Again, I'm 13 volumes in, tons of female nudity. No male nudity. I don't think I've seen one dong in the series so far. Not one. At least make it equal if you're going to do it. Make it equal. Someone should have dropped pipe sometime. Also, kind of just as a little branching off of the point of the treatment of women, Casca, I'm so frustrated with how her character was treated. I really, really liked her character earlier on in the Golden Age arc. Like, I really connected with her in a lot of ways. But after a while, I did really start to notice that she was being treated differently than the other male characters. I feel like she really wasn't shown to do much of anything without Guts or Griffith leading her on in some ways. Like, she was so dependent on both of them. There's so many damsel in distress moments with her, and I feel like it's just a way to get us to like Guts more, or to, show off her body in some way, or just to titillate. She's used as an object so much in the story. And like, the thing is, she should have been a really badass character. We're told so much about her abilities, not only her physical, like fighting abilities, but her leadership abilities. But we never get to see like any of that. We're told about it. We're never shown it. And I read somewhere, I don't know how true this is, but I don't know. I've heard it from multiple sources, so I'm assuming it is true. I heard that Miura only left her alive after the end of the eclipse just to serve as motivation for Guts, which is so annoying and gross to me. Your main female character at that point, and you couldn't even like make her be her own person. It just was really frustrating to me. As I said before, Casca is used so much as just an object in this story, not a person. She's something to be saved. She's something to be used as for motivation. It got to be so frustrating to me, and it really just telegraphed this problem of the women in this story. And it was like truly the straw that broke the camel's back. That was the point where I was just like, I'm not doing this anymore. I can't stand how women are written here, and I don't want to continue. So while the other things combined kind of started to get to me, this was really the one that just broke me. So that brings us to the end of that section of why I'm stopping with this series. With all these things combined, honestly, I set the book down one day. I had gotten the deluxe volumes from the library. I set one of them down one day, and I just could not bring myself to pick it back up and continue on, especially knowing what I did about the future things that happened in the series. I was just like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I decided that I just wasn't going to force myself to read it anymore. There's no point. Life's too short, And what could have been even worse, I wasn't going to pretend to like it. I wasn't just going to come on here and pretend to like it just because it's a really well-loved series. I don't like to dislike things that are popular. I've said this in past videos. I don't like when I don't connect with something that's popular. I want to be in the community of the fandom. I want to be part of the club, but we just have to accept that all popular things are not going to work for all of us. So with all that said, I will not be continuing on with the series, obviously. I guess I really just wanted to get that off my chest. It feels really good having said all this out loud. It just feels really good. If you're still watching at this point in the video, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here and hearing me out. If you have any feelings about Berserk, I would love to know, even if you completely disagree with me. I'm always curious of what people think either way on either side of the spectrum. So anyways, we'll get them next time. Maybe someday I'll change my mind and I'll decide to give it another go. But for now, I'm going to step away. So that's all. I've yelled at your ears for long enough. That's all for me this time. Until next time, just have a really, really great day. Farewell.